Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Tzadik Amud Beis, starting with the new Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Tzadik Amud Aleph. The Mishnah discusses when a Korban Pesach is brought for somebody who's Tameh on Yud Dalid, but will become Tahor and able to eat the Korban Pesach on the night of Tes Vav. Specifically, the Mishnah discusses a Zav and a Zava. A Zav is a male who sees an emission either once or twice within 2 days. The status is he has to count 7 clean days, and then on the 7th day, he is toivel in a mayan, in a wellspring, and then that night, he has harav shemesh, and after nightfall, he can go ahead and eat kachim. If he sees 3 times within 3 days, then he not only does he have to count 7 days and be toivel on the 7th day, but even after nightfall, he cannot eat kachim. He has to bring a korban. He has to bring a korban for a kapara the next day. It's called mechusar kippurim. The zava, she sees blood not during the 7 days of her menstrual cycle, but rather of the 11th days afterwards. And if she sees either once or twice, she counts 1 day, 1 clean day, keneged. It's a day that's keneged, the day of the seeing of the dam. Then she's toivel in the mikvah, and that night, after harav shemesh, she can eat kachim. However, if she sees 3 times within 3 days, then she must count 7 clean days, and then she is toivel on the 7th day. And even though nightfall comes, she cannot eat kachim until she brings her korban the next day. She's also nechshav a mechusar kippurim. Says the Mishnah, Zov shera shtei re'iyos, a Zov who sees 2 re'iyos, shoichtin Allah b'shvi. So since that Zov can go ahead and toivel in the mikvah, or in the mayan rather, on the 7th day, therefore you can sheichet the korban Pesach for him when his 7th day is on Yud Dalid ben Nisan, and he'll be able to then partake and eat the korban Pesach that night. Ra shalosh shoitin ala bishmini shaloi. However, if he sees 3 days, so then since he has to not only count the 7th day, and not only is he then going to then wait till harav shemesh from the 7th day when nightfall comes, but he will still not be able to partake in the korban Pesach until the next day when he himself brings the korban Pesach. Brings the korban for a kapara. So therefore, on the 8th day, only the 8th day comes out to be on Yud Daled, where you have to then shech the korban Pesach on his behalf, so he can then partake in the korban Pesach that night. Shomeres yoim keneged yoim. A woman who sees blood again during one of the 11 days after the 7th day of cycle, then shoichdin alea b'sheni shelo. Then she who sees then the next day when she shomeres yoim keneged yoim, you can go ahead and shech the korban Pesach for her, because since that day she'll be pure. If she's toiv on the mikvah, she just needs harav shemesh the night of Tes Vav to then be able to partake of the korban Pesach. However, and if she sees 2 days, so then you need a 3rd day to be shomeres yoim keneged yoim. The 3rd day that's going to be clean. She can be toivel in the mikvah, and then that 3rd day, that night after harav shemesh, she'll be able to partake in the korban Pesach. However, v'hazava shoichtin aleh b'shmini. A zava is referred to a zava gedola, where she saw 3 times within 3 days. So then she has to count 7 clean days. And in addition to that, she can only bring her korban the next day. She's mechusar kippurim, whereby only the next day, on the 8th day, can go ahead and shech the korban Pesach. It comes out to be Yud Dalid on her behalf. Says the Gemara, Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Rav. Sheichdim v'zarkin al tevul yoim u'mechusar kippurim. Rav says, we allow one to sheichet and zarik the dam on behalf of somebody who's a tful yom. Again, tful yom means that he was toivel in the mikvah, but he has to wait till harav shemesh, till nightfall. So if that comes out to be on Yud Dalid, we'll shech and zarik the dam on behalf of that person. So too with a mechusar kippurim. If that person still needs to bring a carbon, and on that day he's able to bring a carbon, which would be Yud Dalid ben Nisan, so then we'll also shecht and zarek the dam on his behalf, because on that night, that subsequent night, after nightfall, he'll be able to eat the carbon Pesach. On top of Tzadik Amud Beis, the Ein Shoichtin, Rav says, V'zarkin al Tamei Sheretz. However, somebody who's Tamei Sheretz, we will not be able to zarek, shoichet, and zarek the dam of a carbon Pesach on his behalf. The Gemara has to explain why that's so. After all, he can go ahead and be toivil, and after nightfall, lechara, he's tohar. He's only tevul yoim. So Gemara will have to explain that position of Rav. Ve'ula argues, and therefore Ula says, Ula Omar, af shoichtim v'zarkin al tamei sheretz. Not only do we zarek and shoichet for somebody who's a tevul yoim and mechusar kippurim, but also somebody who is tamei sheretz. The Gemara asks right away, L'Rav, who says we do not shoichet and zarek for somebody who is tamei sheretz. My shna tevul yoim. Why the tevul yoim we do shoichet and zarek the dam? Says the Gemara, dechazi leorta, because he's going to be then fitting for that night. He just has to wait for nightfall. Ask the Gemara, then tamei sheretz nami chazi leorta. Also the tamei sheretz can also be toivil, and that night he'll then be he'll be fitting to then be tohar. Says the Gemara, no, mechusar tevila. He's lacking being toivel in the mikvah. Ask the Gemara, tvul yoim nami mechusar herav shemesh. But even the one who was toivel tvul yoim, although he was toivel, but nonetheless, he still has to wait till the nightfall. So that he's also tolui on herav shemesh. Says the Gemara, shimsha memela arva. Because the shemesh, that will set mimela automatically. It doesn't require any action on his part. So the Gemara explained the one who says tvul yoim. But what about when he says mechusar kippurim? Ask the Gemara, mechusar kippurim nami ha mechusar kapara. But mechusar kippurim also is lacking a kapara. He also needs to do an action of shechting a carbon to get a kapara, for him to have his tahara. Answers the Gemara, shekinoi biyadai. He has the birds in his hand. He has either shtei tarim or shnei b'nei yoina to then go ahead and affect the carbon. Ask the Gemara, but tamei sheretz nami harei mikvah lefonav. But the tamei sheretz also has the mikvah. All he has to do is toivel in the mikvah. So why is that going to then preempt and preclude him from then going ahead and then allowing him to then have the carbon Pesach at night? Gemara says Dilma Pasha, because maybe he'll be negligent and not be toivel. Ask the Gemara, Ihachi, if that's so, then mechusar kippurim nami Dilma Pasha. The one who has the two birds in his hand, maybe he'll also be negligent and not bring them as a carbon. Answers the Gemara, Kigon the masrin hu lebezdin. He already gave them to bezdin, a bezdin of kohanim. Ukter Rav Shmaya, like Rav Shmaya taught, the Almar chazake ein bezdin shel kohanim oim de mishom ad sheyochlu. Most shebeshoiforos. The bezdin of kohanim, they remain in the azara until they're certain that that which was given over for mechusar kippurim, for those who need a carbon to be brought, to allow them to have tahara, they will ensure that it is brought. So therefore, when the individual who's mechusar kippurim has these two birds in his hand, it's as if it's not considered to be lacking a maisa, whereby that's why we enable him to go ahead, somebody to shech the Korban Pesach for him, even though he has not yet brought the Korban Pesach. Even though he has not brought his Korban for a kapara. Ularab mid'araisa michzi chazi v'rabanan hu degazu bei. Now that Rab is saying the whole reason is because Shema Posha, maybe indeed he will not be toivil, and therefore he'll be negligent. That's why we can't go ahead and take the one who's tamei sheretz and shech the Korban Pesach on his behalf to be sheichet and zarek the dam, is because of this dirabonim of the fact that he might be negligent. But midiraisa, there's no problem. Midiraisa, there's no issue. He's mechzi. He's fitting. So the more now asks, Alama, then why Rav does Rav say mitamin echad mehem b'sheretz? We learned earlier that Rav says when half of the tzibur is tamei meis and the half of the tzibur is not tamei meis. So what should we do? What's the protocol in such a situation? Rav says we take somebody who is Tamei Sheretz, and we then put him on the side, so to speak, to make it a roiv of a tzibur that's going to be Tamei. Whereby, since the rov tzibur is Tamei, then we allow them to bring the Korban Pesach in a state of Tuma. So ask the Gemara, how can he have said that? If it's indeed Chazi, somebody who's Tamei Sheretz is Chazi Midi Araisa, then he himself can bring the carbon, he himself Midi Araisa can bring the Korban Pesach. So how can you then put him on the scale together with those who are Tamei Meis to make it a roiv? Rather, you must say that Rav holds that Midi Araisa, the Tamei Sheretz is not fitting. It says in the pasuk, Ish ki Tamei lenefesh. A man who will be Tamei lenefesh, referring to somebody who's Tamei, he cannot bring the Korban Pesach. Mi lo yaskina. We're not talking about shachal shvi shelo liyos be'erev haPesach dainu tumas sheretz. Are we not talking about somebody who is Tamei lenefesh, just like somebody who's Tamei lenefesh because he's Tamei meis, equally as somebody who's Tamei sheretz, whereby he would have to be toivel on the seventh day and wait till nightfall. So too, somebody who's Tamei nefesh, he has to wait 7 days, and on the seventh day he is toivel and has to wait till nightfall. V'amar Torah says nitchi. He is pushed off, just like the Tamei meis is pushed off. So too, the Tamei sheretz is pushed off to the Korban Pesach sheni. If you'll ask, how do you see from this that we're referring to indeed also somebody who's Tamei sheretz, and it's the seventh day of the Tamei meis? That's the comparison. Maybe we're not talking about the seventh day. Maybe we're talking about the Tamei meis before that, in his 6 days before, prior. Sover like Rabbi Yitzchak. The Gemara said no, because he holds like Rabbi Yitzchak Rav does. My meis mitzvah hayu shechal shvi shel haniyos be'erev Pesach. That he said that Tamei meis mitzvah, they are who has the seventh day to be on the 14th of Nisan. Shenemar says lo yachlu lases haPesach b'yom hahu. He's medayik the pasuk. You cannot bring a Korban Pesach on that day, on the day of the 14th. B'yom hahu. Who the einan yichoin lasos, only on that day of the 14th, because you're tamei. Aval lemochar yachol lasos. The next day, the deal could be you could bring because you'd be already tahor. And there the Torah says that he's pushed away. So too, when it comes to the one who's tamei meis, is pushed away for the Korban Pesach sheni. So too, midiaraisa, Rav learns like Rav Yitzchak that the one who's tamei sheretz is also pushed away. He's pushed off until the Korban Pesach sheni. Tanan, the Gemara brings a kasha on Rav from our Mishnahs. It states, Zav sherosh de re'iyos, a Zav who sees twice. Shoichtin Allah b'shvi. So he has to count 7 clean days. On the 7th day he is toivel in the mikvah, but he has to wait, he's tvul yom, he has to wait till Harav Shemesh, till nightfall. And it states over there, when his 7th day comes out to be on Yud Daled ben Nisan, we shecht and zarek the dam on his behalf, so that he can go ahead and partake in the Korban Pesach that night. My lab deloy tovil. Are we not talking about where he did not tovil yet? And therefore we can derive from here that we do shoichet and zarek the dam for somebody who's tamei sheretz who did not yet tovil in the mikvah also on that day. So therefore it would be a kasha on Rav who says that we're shoichtin v'zarkin the dam for somebody who is somebody who is a Zov, but we're not Shoichet and Zarek the Dam for somebody who's Tamei Sheretz. Says Gemara, Loi de Tovil. No, we're talking about where he did indeed Tovil himself before, and that's why the Zov, we can Shecht and Zarek the Dam on his behalf. But the one who is Tamei Sheretz, who did not yet Tovil in the mikvah, there we cannot Shecht and Zarek the dam on his behalf. Ask the Gemara, Itovil, my kamash malon. If we're talking about a Zov who did Tvila in the mikvah, what's coming to teach us over here? What's the Chiddush? Hakamash malon, the Gemara explains, the Afagad the Mechusa Harav Shemesh, even though that he needs to wait until nightfall, Kamashman, the Shim Shemimela Arva. But we're coming to teach that the Shemesh is going to set, so therefore not considered to be lacking a maisa. We'll be able to shecht on his behalf, whereby after nightfall he'll be able to then partake in the Korban Pesach. Gemara says, Hochanam mistaber, and it's mistaber to say that indeed he was toivil In the case of the Zov, Midiktani Sefer, from the fact that it teaches in the Sefer of our Mishnah, Ra Shalosh Re'iyoi Shoitna La B'Shmini. If the Zov saw 3 times within 3 days, so then not only does he have to count 7 days and he's a Tvul Yoim, but nonetheless, but even at nightfall, he's still not tar until he brings then the carbon kapara the next day. Whereby, if it's the next day, the Shmini is going to be Yudalid ben Nisan, will shecht on his behalf. If you want to say in the ratio, we're talking about a Zov, who indeed was Toivil, then Itztrich, then we do need the case in the Sefer. You might think to say when he saw only twice, and therefore he is Toivil, and therefore he's not lacking a Maisa, means he doesn't have to then bring a carbon. Aval Rosh, and we say that he was Toivil. Aval Rosh Shalosh Dish Bishmini, the Mechusar Maisa Mechusar Kapara Loi. But somebody who still has to then bring a carbon, then we'll say we will not shech the carbon Pesach on his behalf on the 8th day. Kamash Malon, the Afal the Mechusar Kapara Sheichtin Vizarkin Ilave. But coming to teach us that even though it seems to be lacking a maisa, he still has to bring a carbon. We say since he brought the carbon to the bezdin of the kohanim, he's assured that they will bring the carbon on his behalf. So it's not considered to be lacking a maisa, and therefore will shecht the carbon pesach on his behalf. But if you want to say he was not toivil in the case of the reisha, in the case of the zav where he saw once or twice, and then he was not toivil, and still we can sheich it and zoich on his behalf. Ra shoilish b'shmini lamali. Then why do we need the case where he sees 3 times? That's going to be poshit that we will not sheich it on the behalf of the one who is still mechusar kippurim. The hashta yesh loimer ra shtei re'iyos b'shvi deloy tovil. The tamei ma'al yehu shachtin v'zarkina lave. If the person, no, I say it better. Let's go back a step. I said it wrong. Again, if you want to say that indeed somebody who just saw 2 times and he did not toivil in the mikvah, why do I take this case of that he saw 3 times that will shecht on his behalf on the 8th day? That's poshit, as the Gemara now explains. Hashta, now yesh loymar rosh re'iyos b'shvi the loy tovil. If in a case where he saw twice and he's not toivel, that means since he was not toivel, his state of tuma is a strong tuma. He's in a state of tuma, he didn't toivel yet, and still was shoichet in Zarek Pesach on his behalf. Then Rosh Shalish B'Shmi, the toivel le B'Shvi, the Klisha tuma, lo kol shekein the shachtim v'zakini lavei. But with somebody who saw 3 times, and then on his 7th day he was toivil. Now comes the 8th day where his tuma is now weak because he already was toivil. He just has to wait for a carbon kapara. Then certainly will shech the carbon pesach on his behalf. Rather, we can prove from here that the reisha, in the case of the zav, is that indeed he was toivil. The Gemara says, no, you have no proof that indeed he was talking about when he was toivil. Loi la'olam aimoloch de loi tovil. I can tell you in the reisha he was not toivil. The itztrich, and still we need to teach. I might think in the case in the reisha where he himself was not toivil, but still, since it's biyadoi l'sakin, he can go ahead and toivil in the mikvah. Therefore, we'll shech the Kohen Pesach on his behalf. Aval b'shmini de'ein b'yodel lahakriv korban ema pashoy be kayhanim. But in the case of the zav who saw 3 times, so then comes the 8th day, he's dependent on the kayhanim to bring the carbon kapar on his behalf. Then we will not shecht on his behalf, I might think. Kamash malan kid Rav Shemaya. Therefore, we learn like Rav Shemaya that we can soymech, we can rely on the bezdin of kohanim to certainly bring the carbon on his behalf, whereby it's not considered to be mechusar a maisa, and therefore we will, yes, shech the carbon pesach on his behalf. The Gemara now brings the seif of our Mishnah, v'hazava shoichtin v'chulei. Here it states in the Mishnah that the zava, the woman who sees 3 times, she says, Zava Gedoyla, we shoichet the Karban Pesach on the 8th day. In other words, we explained that the Zava Gedoyla who saw 3 times, she has to count 7 days. And then, not only is she considered Tuvul Yoim, but even after nightfall, she can't eat kachim because only the next day, when she then brings the Karban Kapara, could she be partaking in the kachim. So says the Gemara that following night. So says the Gemara, Tani Tana Kamei Rav Ade Bar Ava. There was a brisa that was taught before Rav Ade Bar Ava, and it taught the following words: V'hazove shoichtin alel b'shvi shalom. Here it says in the brisa that the Zava Gedoyla, they would shech the Karban Pesach on the 7th day. Ask the Gemara, how can that be? Omar lei Zava b'shvi shalom michazya. She's not fitting. In other words, she, on the 7th day, is somebody who is only somebody who can then be toivel, but she not only is going to be toivel tevul yoim, has to wait till nightfall, but she also is mechusar kippurim. So certainly we can't shech the Karban Pesach for on the 7th day. Says the Gemara, even the opinion that says Ula, that you can be shoichet and zarek on the Tmei Sheretz, who then is toivel, who could be toivel that day, so therefore he'll be tohor that night. Hanimili Tmei Sheretz dechazi leorta, because he'll be fitting that night after being toivel that day, because he's only a tevul yoim. Ha'ad lamacha demasya kapara lechazya. But until the next day, where she needs to bring a kapara, she's not going to be fitting. She has to bring the carbon only on the 8th day. Says the Gemara, you're right. The brisa has to be explained as follows. Ema b'shmini. Say that the brisa meant this 8th day, just like our Mishnah states. Ask the Gemara pshita. Just like it would be a question on the brisa, it's truly a question on our Mishnah. That was pashit. Of course, we can shoichet a Karban Pesach on the 8th day of the Zava Gedoyla. Mahu, the same way you might think to say. Kivon the mechaser kapara loy. Since she's lacking a kapara, you might think that she needs a maisa, and therefore she cannot shech the Karban Pesach on her behalf. Kamash malan k'Rav Shemaya. Therefore, we learn like Rav Shemaya that it's not considered lacking a maisa, since you can rely on the bezdin of kohanim to certainly bring a Karban kapara on her behalf. Ravina brings a different version of what we just taught. He says, Nida de Tana Kame. The Tana taught a brisa in front of Rav Ade Bar Ava about regarding a Nida. Vehanida Shoichtin ale b'shvi. And the Nida, it stated in this brisa that was taught, a Nida, they sheichit on her, the Karban Pesach, on the 7th day. Now a Nida's din is slightly different. A Nida is a woman who sees dam, and she then waits 7 days. They don't have to be clean days, 7 days, midiaraisa. And motzoi, after the 7th day, not on the 7th day, but after the nightfall of the 7th day, that night after, she is toivel in the mikvah. So that night, she's toivel in the mikvah. So the Gemara says, over here, Bryce was taught that the Nida, we shoichet a Karban Pesach for her on the 7th day itself. Omar Le, the Gemara asks, Nida b'shvi michazya, on the 7th day, is she fitting? She has to wait till after 7 days to be toivel. Even Ula that says that a Tamei Sheretz who has not yet been toivel in the mikvah, you can still shech the Karban Pesach for him on his day, because he can go ahead and subsequently toivel in the mikvah and be tar that night. Nida la'arta de shvi hu de tavla, but the Nida, she has to be toivel only after the 7th day at night. Ad shmini da avda herev shemesh lochazia, and then she has to therefore wait till the next day until she has terev shemesh, which means only after the nightfall of the 8th day. In other words, after the 7th night, as she's toivel, she's mutter to her husband. But in regards to then kachim, she has to wait until the nightfall of the 8th day. Ella, the Gemara says, Ema Shmini. You must say that the Brisa meant to say that the Nida, you can check the Karban Pesach on her behalf on the 8th day. Ask the Gemara, Pshita, that's Pashit. Answers the Gemara to explain Hashta. Uma zava de mechsera kapara shoichlim v'zarkin ala b'shmini. When it comes to the zava gedoyla who's lacking a kapara, she still needs to bring a carbon. We will shecht on her behalf on the 8th day, even if she has not yet brought that carbon. But still, we'll do that because it's not considered to be mechusar ma'isa. Needed the lo mechsera kapara tzricha lemeir de shachtim v'zarkin lo. The nida that is not lacking a kapara. She doesn't have to bring a carbon. She just has to wait. So by her, certainly will be sheichet and zarek a carbon pesach on her behalf. Says Gemara, nida itzrichale, the chiddush that we need to teach over here. By nida, hakamash malon bishmini in bishvi loy. Coming to teach us on the 8th day we can only shecht a carbon pesach on her behalf, but not on the 7th day, because on the 7th day she's still tamei. She has to wait till the night of the 7th, after the 7th day, to be toivil. Kidetan, like it says in the Brisa, Kol chayiv tevilois tevilasan beyoim. All of those who are chayiv and do have a mitzvah to be toivil, let's say like a mitzvah or a zov, they are labeled to be toivil even on Yom Kippurim. Nida v'yoledes tevilasan balayla. Whereas a nida and a yoledes, they can only be toivil on Yom Kippur if it's that night, subsequent to their 7th day. If the night of Yom Kippur comes out to be that night after their 7th day. The Tanya, but not on the day, not on Erev Yom Kippurim. The Tanya, like it states in the Brisa, Yochol, I may think tehei toivelis mi b'oidoim, that a nida can go ahead and be toivelis the day before on Erev Yom HaKippurim. Talmuloi mashivas yamim tehiyeh medinasa benidasa. She needs 7 days in her nida. That means 7 full days, and can be able to toivel afterwards, but not on the 7th day. Tehei benidasa kol shiva. All 7 days she has to be in her state of nida. The yoledes iskish nida, and the one who gave birth to gave birth, she also has a hekesh. We learn out from nida, that just like the nida has to have 7 full days, so too the yoledes of a male has to have 7 full days and only can then be toivil subsequent to the 7th day.